Hey, deserving listeners, it's wedding day. Let's watch.
Do you promise to love her for as long as you both shall live?
I do.
Whoa. Whoa. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I thought that Colleen and Matt weren't going to say yes and yes, but they did. So, what do I know? Wow. Huh. Yeah, so maybe Kwame, in all of his love, you would imagine that he would say, and I'm sure they'll interview him after, because, they have to play it up for the cameras. I think they're explicitly told that they can't explicitly say on camera or even to the other person what they're intending on doing. So maybe that threw a wrench in his ability to express himself. Also, I think he might be a little on the unexpressive side in terms of lovey-doveys. It could be a cultural thing. It could be a family thing. It could be a him thing. Maybe some people intensely love someone, but if you were an outsider, you wouldn't notice it. You wouldn't see it. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know if I've ever been as surprised as I am. Because with Colleen and Matt, they did have, on camera anyway, a connection and a relationship. But with Kwame, I mean, ever since like a couple days after meeting in person, Kwame, especially his behavior towards Micah, so I'm guessing they've had some talks over the past couple weeks, if they're still together, which I assume that they are. So he says yes and she says yes. Huh. Wow, surprise. I could imagine them working out. I could, absolutely. There's some things that would have to be discussed. Kwame's behavior towards Micah, one. Now, who knows? Maybe the two people are polyamorous. That is a thing, particularly in Seattle, actually. So maybe for Chelsea, she's like, well, yeah, I mean, in the future, I plan on exploring that with Kwame and vice versa. Who knows? We just can't know. There's that. It's also possible that Kwame, over time, will learn to really solidify his love and his commitment to Chelsea and will not even have the feeling inside of him available to flirt with other women like he was with Micah. I don't know. There's just a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever it is.
Yeah, you know what
Husband, wife.
Yeah, that. It's a good day.
It's the best day, Kwame. Baby, you're my husband.
I mean, even after he said yes at the altar, he seems, at least on the surface, to be lackluster about the relationship. She's way more enthusiastic overtly. So if he said yes at the altar, then I guess that points to him legitimately wanting to be with her. And yet he's still having that standoffish style, which is fine. Some people just aren't super expressive or they don't like to get all bushy-gushy, and that's fine. And behind closed doors, he might even be that way. Maybe he just doesn't like PDA or he's uncomfortable. It's fine. So, it's just interesting. And it is something to think about for yourself. If you have a loved one in your life that's like Kwame, it's possible that they're just not particularly adept or used to expressing themselves in overt manners, and you might have to look a little deeper for the love and notice other kinds of behaviors, other indications. I've done that in my own life to reorient myself and stop having the narrative that this person doesn't love me or care about me. And when I orient myself, there's different love languages, so to speak. There's a lot of pseudoscience around the love language concept, but it is worthy to think about in terms of the way people express themselves. Also, if you tend to be more like Kwame, or people tell you that you're not very expressive or you're reserved, or you find that people don't really understand your true feelings for them, you might want to think about how you come across and what you're afraid of, what your traumas are that result in you having a bit of hesitancy. There is a schema in schema therapy that involves this, where when you're young, you're treated in a way that you end up concluding that your emotions are a bother to you, that they're troublesome in some way. And so you will learn neurologically, subconsciously, and somewhat consciously early in life to subdue all emotions internally and externally through expression. And so it's harder to identify with emotions, it's harder to express emotions, and so there'll be this tamping down. And that can create a lot of problems, not only in the ability for other people to understand what's going on in your heart and mind, but also the way that we get our needs met often is through emotional expression. And the way we know our own needs is by knowing what emotion we're feeling in the moment. So it might help to go to therapy and work on that.
How did that feel?
Amazing.
I love you so much.
I love you so much too.
And I will say that she is very expressive and intense. And I imagine even fairly expressive people with that much intensity now and also before the wedding might be a little put off. Might be wow, it really throws everything. I was concluding all sorts of things. I was like, you might remember me saying I was pretty sure that they had a conversation even that morning when they were out shopping and they had all those weird fights. So now I'm wondering what was going on with those fights where she was like, you need to have this strawberry and throwing under the bus, and how she was in a bad mood that morning and she didn't really admit it. I don't know. It just throws everything. Of course, we don't know because they don't give us much data, but yeah, I mean, all's well that ends well, I guess. I will say that I really enjoy that they're depicting a very typical Seattle day. People say it rains in Seattle, and in my experience, it doesn't actually rain that often, but it is cloudy almost all the time, particularly in the months between October and June. It's cloudy and it's not super hot, it's not super cold. It's just this semi-warm blanket that covers everything. So this area where they're at is east of Seattle, about a 30-minute drive, maybe 20-minute drive. And Stacy and I grew up in between that drive. So we grew up in between environment like this and downtown Seattle. So this environment is very familiar to me. The trees, the mountains, and the clouds, and you can probably tell the weather. It's probably about 55 degrees. That's what I always say. It's like in Seattle, pretty good chance on any given day it's going to be overcast, not raining, and 55 degrees Fahrenheit. But yeah, that venue is beautiful. It's really picturesque.
I think that in this moment, the best thing that I can do for us is to give you the opportunity to answer first.
Wow, we haven't seen that before, right? Okay, so I guess we'll see. I mean, if you're Paul, there's something in the messaging there that if you're 100%, then you just say yes. But well, that's interesting. So there's a lot of data points pointing towards Micah not really knowing who she is, and not really. She said something earlier to Paul, when they're saying nice things to each other. She said something like, "You love me," or you made me feel like I was a good person in spite of my bad qualities, or something like that. It's interesting that she said that, but there are some data points in the column of the hypothesis that, for whatever reason, she doesn't really know who she is. She doesn't know what she wants. And of course, age can play a role in that, but often other factors play into that as well. But anyway, and then also she talked about how going through a divorce, she wanted to not be divorced in her adult life. Who knows what she went through that experience that could affect this aspect of the self, knowing what you want, knowing who you are, knowing how you feel, knowing what your needs are. We of course don't have a lot of data to go off of, but there seems to be some evidence pointing in the direction that she doesn't know who she is, and so she wants to be accepted. She wants to have relationships. And so when she's with people, she chameleonizes herself to who she's around. So when she was around Irina, she acted like Irina. I think that Micah, even if this is true, also has a streak of Irina in her anyway, right? It seemed that some of their behavior was absolutely generated by Micah herself. And then when she's around Paul, she wants to be with him. And then when Paul's out of her eyesight and Kwame's right there, she wants to be with him. And when she's around other people, she will just be like them. She talked about how she's an empath and the beginning of the season, and that could be an application of that term, which I went into detail when I first watched it, to describe that experience where whoever she's around, she absorbs their point of view, their way of thinking, their wants, their needs, their style, their personality. People will talk about this as if people have no personality and they're manipulative or whatever, and certainly that can be the case, but there's a lot of gray zone there. It's not like what I'm describing is an all or nothing. It's not like, even if this were true, I wouldn't be conceptualizing her as someone who lacks any personality or any self. It's just a matter of degree as to how much of the self you're in connection with. How much of a solid identity does she have, which is the terminology in my field. So in this moment, she's being asked to commit. She's being asked to state what she wants first. And it's possible that that's overwhelming to her, and or she literally just doesn't know the answer to that question and will defer. And people who don't know what they want and aren't in connection with their needs, when you ask them a question like, do you want to marry this person? They don't have, so if for you, if you're married or you're engaged or you decided not to get married, when you made that decision or someone asked you, would you like to get married or you think you might marry this person? How do you come up with an answer to that question? Where do you go? People will say that there's a logic to it. It's like, well, they check all the boxes. We share similar life goals. I'm attracted to the person. And certainly those factors are a part of the decision-making process, but it's kind of an amorphous process. There's a lot of intangibles. We go inward. We start to try on different futures. We try to get close to our feelings. We have other relationships to reference, like, well, in these other relationships, I felt this way, but in this relationship, I feel this way. And there are indications that this would happen, and this is how I feel when I'm with this person. A lot of that depends on your ability to notice your emotions and feel them and catalog them and remember them, right? How do you feel overall on average, like for yourself? Think about if you're in a current relationship or some other relationship, if you're not in a romantic relationship, how would you summarize overall how you feel when you are in a relationship with this person? That is a very strange question, right? We don't have a log, some sort of, Excel spreadsheet with all these numbers. We just go inward and we're like, well, I feel this way, generally positive in this way, and sometimes it can be this way, but overall, this is my vibe with this person. And there's all these nuances to it and exceptions to the rule. How do we answer that question? It's weird that we even have that ability to, the ability to abstractly pull together an abstract, long-lasting, perhaps decades-long relationship and summarize it and describe it in some way. It might not feel entirely comprehensive, of course, the description, but we often can do that. Well, the ability to do that depends on the ability to ongoingly be in connection with yourself and your emotions and your needs and your body and who you are. And some people just don't have that connection. They do have a self, they do have needs, they do have emotions, but they aren't in connection with those cognitively and neurologically and behaviorally. It's meaning that they don't have a habit of looking at themselves. So in those instances, when you're literally asked, do you want to marry this person? Is love blind? And you go inward, you don't know how to answer that question. There's no answer. You don't see any, you see other people making decisions and you're like, how do they make decisions? I don't understand. Indecisiveness, chronic indecisiveness can sometimes be related to this. So I don't know, but there are a lot of ticks in that column that we've seen. Not enough for me to solidly or confidently conceptualize her this way, but it is interesting that she said that. I suspect they're not going to get married is the thing, because they didn't seem to have the qualities that, say, Brett and Tiffany did. But of course, neither did Kwame, so what do I know? But let's see what Paul says.
I wish I was way drunker.
So apparently they've mic'd up the friend, or they have a really good directional mic on her, and she says, "I wish I was way drunker." They could have moved that scene along. I mean, we know she was sitting at the wedding, but it could have been before this all happened, but I don't know.
Paul, do you promise to love Micah, supporting her through the experiences of your lives, and to share in the joy?
And also, another possibility, another factor, is that she's insecure and she wants to say yes, but she doesn't want to say yes and have him say no. So she's deferring to him because she doesn't want to put herself out there, which we could imagine that would be an impulse. Or she knows that she wants to preserve her image, and if he says no, then she would say, well, yeah, I was going to say no too. I don't know. There's just a lot of possibilities.
Ways of choosing one another for as long as your souls are united.
Now, I will say, and I hesitated to say this originally when they're ramping up to the wedding, both of them were talking in ways, and I don't know if I was just reading into it, they were talking in ways that indicated that either they were heavily on the fence or were probably going to say no, but they couldn't reveal that on camera or even to their families. I don't know.
I love you, but I don't think that we can choose each other right now.
All right, hard to know what that means. Possibly that they're going to date after the show. Kind of sounds like that. Initially, it looks like she's a little upset about that, but let's continue watching.
But I think that we're not there.
Okay, so that's totally rational. You've heard me say this many times. The rational thing to do would be to not get married at the end of this 2-month process, and even if you're 100% sure, you just can't know. And it would be more prudent and intelligent or wise to even just bounce off the show, because you wouldn't want to have the unromantic experience of a failed wedding. You would just leave the show and date off the show. So maybe they are going to date afterwards.
I feel like that's exactly what you're going to say. I think that this whole time I've wanted to feel shown and told, you know, that you loved me and that you wanted to be with me.
Okay, so it kind of looks like this is genuine, does it not? It looks like she's having a genuine reaction and that she genuinely didn't know what he was going to say, which is interesting. Who knows? Maybe it's all an act. And the other part of this is that I think we know that the producers sit down with them, probably interview them and get an idea of what they're going to say at the altar, and then they decide who's going to answer the question first, and then they inform them. I don't think they have a say in that. I mean, maybe they do, but it's possible that they interviewed both people and then they went to Micah and they said, okay, you're going to go first, because they just, it's a bigger drama if Micah says yes and Paul says no, right? It's less of a drama if he says no first and we don't really know what she was going to say. So, and I guess it's even a bigger drama if she says no and we don't know what he's going to say. I don't know, but I can imagine that they wanted it to go that way, and Micah's like, I don't want to play into that narrative. Maybe she knew it, maybe she didn't, but she's like, I don't want to play it like that. Because I'm going to take a guess and say the producers aren't encouraging them to improvise at the altar like that, where she's just like, yeah, what do you think? I'm just taking a guess and say that if they knew that she was going to do that, they would either try to encourage her not to or just have Paul go first, or I don't know. Well, who knows? But she did say something interesting, and I don't know if I'm just reading into it. I'm sure that I am, but let's review what she just said there.
I feel like that's exactly what you're going to say. I think that this whole time I've wanted to feel shown and told, you know, that you loved me and that you wanted to be with me.
So on one hand, what she just said there is normal and healthy and rational and wise. I want the same thing for my wife. She wants the same thing for me. We want to know that our partner loves us and that they want to be with us. Having seen what we've seen in this season with her, who knows? And I hate even speculating this because I worry that people will say that I said something and go after her or just bully her for this idea anyway. But there has been a hypothesis that I've been putting out there that a lot of her behavior is motivated not necessarily by a mature, reciprocal adult relationship, but by the motivation of trying to get people to like her, and that she doesn't even necessarily know she's doing it, or maybe she does partially, but she is primarily motivated, and this is a total speculation, there's not a lot of data in this camp, but the behavior with Kwame points in this direction where she doesn't actually know what she wants. She doesn't actually know who she is. She doesn't actually feel the kind of love that we would hope or that we would imagine that adults would have. And that because of her insecurities or traumas, she is primarily motivated and on a constant treadmill of trying to get people to love her and trying to get people to like her, trying to get people to be attracted to her. There is a personality syndrome that this involves. She doesn't exhibit the other signs of it, but there are people, I've worked with clients like this, people have emailed in to me and told me about this personality disorder. It involves this compulsion to manipulate other people, sometimes knowingly. Sorry, I need a glass of water. Sometimes knowingly that the individual is actually on a mission to seduce other people or to get them to profess that they're their best friend or something. And they're on a mission and they orient their entire life, in that moment anyway, trying to achieve that. And then once they get a person beyond a threshold that they're looking for, they don't have any feelings for that person and they just drop them like a sack of potatoes. One person that I worked with, and I'll obscure the details to protect confidentiality, but she talked about how she would go to the airport. She was a young woman and she would self-identify as an attractive woman, young woman who knows how to accentuate certain things. And she would go to the airport or around the airport and look for men, older men, middle-aged men who were traveling and who might be looking, who might be suffering in some way in their marriage. And she could kind of tell the men that were like that. And so she would zero in and she would say, I have no attraction to these men. They weren't attractive to me, personality-wise, looks-wise, life-wise. But I totally got off, not in a psychopathic way, but in a desperation way of actually trying to fill a void inside of their soul, which of course doesn't work in the end, but it is a distraction in the moment. She would seduce the men, not only sexually, but she would get them to fall in love with her. And sometimes rather quickly, just in one night, they would say, I'm going to leave my wife and I want to be with you forever. Let's run away. I bought us some tickets to Fiji. Let's move there and live the rest of our lives together. Maybe that was right away. Maybe it was weeks later. But once she got there, then she had achieved her goal and she had no motivation and no feelings towards this person. This is horrific. It's immoral on a number of levels, of course. I'm not making excuses for it. And she knew that about herself. She was very ashamed of it, but it was a compulsion. It was this result of trauma, and it can motivate in that way. I'm not saying that Micah is like that. I'm just saying that there are degrees of this motivation. Essentially, what's happening is the individual feels empty inside. They feel worthless, and they were socialized when they were young to believe that their only worth is their seductive qualities or their inspirational or charismatic qualities. And so we all do this. We all lean into our strengths. The fact that I'm a therapist and a professor and a YouTuber and a podcaster is because I guess have skills or motivations in that area, and I gravitated towards that career because I had the privilege to do so. And we all do that, right? And so, and I'm not gravitated towards other things. I don't try to involve myself in other kinds of activities that are not in my skill set, so we say. And so for all of us, we do this. And so for these individuals, They will lean into things that give them at least some shred of self-esteem and some shred of acceptance. But because they're so focused on the rapid, it's a form of love bombing in a sense, that they're so focused on it, they don't take time to look at themselves and say, what do I want? Because there's always a satisfaction in getting someone to like you, right? In a legitimate way, right? The person that you fell in love with last, you remember the moment where you realized that this person wanted to date you or loved you or liked you or was willing to roll around in bed with you. There's a bit of satisfaction. You don't know the answer to the question, like, what are they going to say? And you're trying to, I don't know, whether you put effort into it or not, you're concerned with it. And then you get that indication and you're like, oh, it's satisfying. We all have that satisfaction. Now, usually it's in the midst of mutual love and genuine affection for each other and compassion and honesty and all that kind of stuff. But for these individuals, they have that part that we can relate to, but it's so desperate that they need to be constantly, if, for example, they were to legitimately fall in love with someone, seduce them, so to speak, and now they're in a relationship, well, they might enjoy to some extent that attachment, but they're not given the opportunity to go back to seducing and having that question answered. It's this question of, am I worthy? Am I attractive? Am I likable? And there's only one way of answering that question, and that is getting someone to profess their undying love for you, not only to you, but also in rejection of their wife and their family and their life. It's a real obvious indication that this person really, really loves you and really, really likes you. Now, what these individuals will tell me when I'm working with them or they're just emailing in is they will say, in the end, I know that it's empty because I'm not presenting my real self. I'm putting forward this fake self. And so although it feels good when I finally get them to like me, I know they don't actually like me for me. Now, of course, you can imagine for some of these individuals, they're sexually abused by a parent when they're young, and they're replaying out that, some of those elements when they're older. And that can be the genesis of this, but it can be other kinds of reasons as well. You could just be neglected, or there could be a divorce in the family where you long to have your dad's attention, but he's frequently out of town or unattentive, or he gets married again and has other kids, and you long for him, and you learn that if you put on a fake self, not a seductive self, but a fake version of yourself, you might be able to get him to finally pay attention, but it's sporadic and it's infrequent. And so you learn that in order to get that attention from him, you need to constantly put out this fake version of yourself. And then maybe the father actually prefers this fake version over the real version. So you can imagine that being locked in, and then that syndrome just gets played out later in life. So I'm not saying that about Micah, but it is one of the many hypotheses that would explain a lot of Micah and Irina's behavior. It's hard to kind of really remember those behaviors because they happened so long ago, but I did rewatch some key scenes and was reminded of how notable her behavior was in those moments, and how notable her really heavy flirting with Kwame, both moments at the pool and then at Chelsea's birthday party. I think Chelsea's birthday party was maybe a week before this wedding. Now, again, as I've said with other people, maybe they're polyamorous. Seattle has a lot of polyamorous people, and maybe Paul is like, yeah, it's fine. I flirt with other people, and maybe we'll have other relationships in our life. It doesn't look that way, but it could be possible. So I don't know. When she said that phrase, it just sort of alerted me to that hypothesis. All right, well, that does it for that episode, everyone. Please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.